Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for tonight's real conversation, Women as Institution Builders. My name is Kathy Waller. I am a graduate of the University of Rochester, class of 1980 and 1983, Simon School. As a trustee and co-chair of the Women's Network and the University of Rochester, at the University of Rochester, as well as a founding chair of the Women's Leadership Council at the Coca-Cola Company, where I retired after 32 years, elevating and celebrating women is very important to me. REAL, R-E-A-L, which stands for Rochester's Equity and Access Leadership, is a virtual conversation series focusing on authentic discussions around equity, measurable action, and meaningful change. Now more than ever, when the topics of diversity, inclusion, equity, and access are central to today's pressing issues in our country, we as a university are committed to engaging in a candid and courageous conversations, committed to listening to each other, and committed to effective action to address these issues. This event is brought to you by the University of Rochester's Office of Alumni Relations and Constituent Engagement, in partnership with the Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Diversity Advisory Council. Before we move forward with our program, we'll share some housekeeping and helpful Zoom tips in the chat box. If you would like to ask a question, you may submit it anytime through the Q&A function that is located at the bottom of the screen. Let me also recognize and thank our captioner and interpreters who are helping ensure that this program is accessible. And now let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist, Camila Barnes. Dr. Barnes has been a registered nurse for more than 14 years and is currently an assistant professor of nursing at Long Island University, Brooklyn, and a nurse practitioner clinician at Northwell Health. Dr. Barnes is also the founder and owner of Barnes Health Affiliates, LLC, a multifaceted healthcare support services company dedicated to educating healthcare leaders, informing best practices, and elevating standards of care within communities. She completed her doctorate and master's degrees at the University of Rochester School of Nursing. She also graduated from Binghamton University with a bachelor's degree in nursing and a minor in Spanish. She is an active community volunteer in nursing organizations, serving as president of the Theta Chi chapter of Chi Eta Phi sorority, and former second vice president and founding board member of Greater New York City Black Nurses Association. Previous special awards and recognitions include the National Black Nurses Association Under 40 Award, the National Sojourner Truth Award, the Marguerite Creth Jackson Award, and the Mary E. Mahoney Award. Welcome, Dr. Barnes. Our next panelist is Lenny Berkowitz-Kahn, director of Baltimore Hunger Project. After years of providing thousands of lunches to homeless women and children from her garage and giving back to Baltimore in varying other ways, Ms. Kahn realized that solving poverty is complex, but feeding children is not. With dedicated volunteers, Baltimore Hunger Project has been keeping kids full and in the classroom since November of 2014. In its earliest days, Baltimore Hunger Project served 30 children in 2 elementary schools. Today, Baltimore Hunger Project is providing over 1,600 meals to children across Baltimore City and Baltimore County schools. Ms. Kahn graduated from University of Rochester in 1991 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Religious Studies. She also received her accounting degree and is a certified public accountant. Welcome, Ms. Kahn. Our third panelist is Dr. Paula Cupertino. Dr. Cupertino is a University of Rochester Medical Center professor of Public Health Sciences and Oncology and Wilmot Cancer Institute's first associate director of community outreach, engagement, and disparities. Dr. Cupertino leads efforts to strengthen and expand Wilmot's research and connections across its 27 county catchment area in upstate New York. A social behavioral behavioral scientist, Dr. Cupertino has focused her research on health disparities in underserved and minority communities, primarily among Latinos and immigrants. Much of her work has been in tobacco control, improving smoking cessation and access to cessation treatments using a community-based approach. Dr. Cupertino also serves as a member of the Medical Center Executive Committee for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Rochester Community Engagement Committee. As part of both efforts, Dr. Cupertino seeks to bring additional resources, infrastructure, and opportunities to build a community-based research program in collaboration with University of Rochester departments, divisions, and centers. Throughout her career, Dr. Cupertino has had more than 40 peer-reviewed publications, and she has been continuously funded for her research since 2003. Welcome, Dr. Cupertino. And our fourth panelist this evening is Lisa Durant-Jones. Dr. Lisa Durant-Jones is the Vice President of Community and Belonging. Prior to this appointment, she served for 3 years as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. Dr. Durant-Jones is also a professor in communication sciences and disorders and has been employed at Nazareth College for 25 years. Dr. Durant-Jones received her doctorate in education from the University of Rochester, holds an MS in speech pathology from Columbia University, and a BS in communication disorders from the College of St. Rose. Dr. Durant-Jones has led numerous institutional initiatives, including the creation of a college-wide diversity and inclusion strategic plan, revising faculty evaluation processes, and first-year mentoring programs for new faculty. Presently, our scholarly interests include issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice in the higher education environment, and interprofessional education. In addition to her teaching and scholarship, she has served in a variety of administrative and supervisory roles, presented at local, state, and national level conferences, and has published in peer-reviewed journals. She was named a diversity champion in 2009 by the American Speech Hearing Language Association and received the Cultural Pluralism Award and at the 2016 conference at the Association of Schools and Allied Health Professions. Professionally, she has over 35 years of experience as a licensed and certified speech language pathologist and was a senior speech language pathologist at the University of Rochester. Welcome, Dr. Durant-Jones. So thank you all for being here. So tonight we're talking about women as institution builders. Each of you is very accomplished in your fields and have chosen and you have chosen to use your expertise in ways that helps the larger community. Can you share with us your experience in carving out this place of success for yourselves within your areas of expertise? And I'm open to anybody who wants to start to answer that question. Jump in, please. I'll call on you.
I'll jump in.
Jump in. Yeah, thank you.
I know how it is when my students don't answer when I ask a question, so I'll jump in. What I'll say is the carving out a place of success really had to be very intentional. My career has been in health field, so I can relate to Dr. Barnes' journey. I'm sure that there's very little diversity in the allied health fields. There's little diversity in faculty positions in higher ed, and there's very little diversity within women administrators in higher ed. So initially I had to be really laser focused with my discipline and my skill set. But it was also critical that I allowed myself to be tapped for some of the less traditional roles that one might assign to my position at that particular time. Having a sponsor was really, really important. And I didn't really early on know the difference between a sponsor and a mentor. I had fabulous mentors. They supported me in terms of my disciplinary pursuits, but a sponsor really was that colleague that was looking to advocate for me and put my name out there in spaces that might have not been viewed as traditional, given where I was in my position. And so I think it was very important that I had that additional support. So that was my thought.
Great, thank you. Dr. Barnes?
Yes, so, I always share the story that originally I wanted to be a teacher in high school. And at some point I decided to do nursing. My mother was a registered nurse. She's retired now. And where I am in my career now, I never imagined. I just knew I wanted to be a nurse, take care of people. I've always prioritized health and wellness. And when I began my nursing journey, I began in med-surg on a unit in a hospital, but I just knew that that was not my niche. And I saw myself more in the community. So I've always been involved with community work, and nurse practitioners seem the way to addressing community issues. I also, that's around that time is when the DNP programs were emerging. And when I was reading up about the role of the DNP, I was very intrigued by the constant language of it being a leadership opportunity to be a change agent in the community. And so that's what inspired me to go back to school. And I also had great mentors as well along the way. I feel like throughout my nursing career, I've always me to the next level. So whenever I said, well, this may not be it, I'm trying to figure things out, I always had somebody there who was more experienced than I was in the field and who carried me to the next level of my career. So I've been very blessed, and now I'm teaching, I'm educating, I'm seeing patients, I'm doing community work, so I really love where I am today.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right.
So I'm not sure that I was ready to carve out a place for myself until I hit my 40s. When I graduated college, I didn't have the confidence to really know what I wanted to do. And when I had graduated college, I started to work for my father, actually, and went back to school and got my accounting degree, like you had mentioned. And it wasn't until my kids were a little bit older that I wanted to go back and give back to the community, which is how Baltimore Hunger Project started. And that's when I really realized that this is really what I was meant to be doing. And I really took a non-traditional path to get to where I belong and doing what I really believe is what I'm meant to be doing. And I almost wish I had taken that leap and maybe had mentors or sponsors along the way and had a little bit more guidance and maybe a lot more confidence to could have saved myself a lot of heartache, I think, in the last maybe 20 years or so.
So I think if I can add on, I have had a similar experience, never remotely thought about, having a career that would lead to leadership. And, when I think about the word of success, I start thinking what might be success for others might not be what is success for me, and never thought that I was ready for leadership or for success. But it has been a journey with being consistent on the work that I want to do, the work that needs to be done. And this has brought, me to where I am. What are the odds that a Brazilian Latina immigrant with accent, would be successful? So here I am, but it wasn't by accident, but it was around keeping myself focused on what I was about to do, to work with the communities and bring voices of the communities. And it brought me here.
Okay, great. So you've talked about having mentors and sponsors. You talked about being ready to do the work that you were called to do at some point. So all of you all have had to have faced all kinds of obstacles and challenges. Can you talk about any of the ones that you had to face, whether they be around gender or race, and how did you continue to move forward past those challenges? Anybody want to go? Or Dr. Barnes, maybe?
Sure, I'll go first. So I completed my DNP degree in my 20s, and I definitely experienced biases amongst my colleagues. And also microaggressions, also ageism. And people don't think about that as an issue in the nursing profession, but that happens as well. Because traditionally nurses have been older. We know that 8% of the nursing profession is Black. So I don't represent the majority. So when people see me, they don't see Dr. Barnes, they see something else, whatever they imagine me to be. So I did experience some microaggressions from colleagues, some not even in my field. I experienced this with even social work teams, and even the minor things, like introducing me to patients and struggling with saying Dr. Barnes. It's little things that I picked up on, and also dealing with conflicts on the team with passive aggressiveness. And so it really created, in some work environments, I've been in hostile work environments. And I think the most important thing to overcome those issues is, number one, stating that what the main goals are and focusing on that, and that's patient care. So focusing on goals, and also having those tough conversations with your colleagues, with your director, calling things out, saying that this is what you experienced, and using your resources in your work environment to support you, because at the end of the day, we should not have to deal with this behavior.
Totally agree. I think Dr. Cupertino, were you trying to answer earlier?
Yeah, I think, over the years, the way that I kind of managed the challenges that, it's interesting that the same challenges that I used to have 20, 25 years ago still come to me, are happening. And mentees sometimes get surprised that I still, deal with some of the challenges. But I usually try to think about them to be more effective. The ones that, it's inner, it's myself, for example, at times feeling I don't belong here. I should not be here. Maybe, this is not the place where I should be. And for me as an immigrant, should I go back to my country? Right? After 27 years, all immigrants only think about that. But there are other challenges that's about, the work environment or the microaggressions. And I think, language is one that I have been dealing my entire career, on my communications. And then how do I deal with this? Trying to understand what can I do to get better. For example, my language, or dealing with this feeling of not belonging. And what is the others, and how can I communicate effectively? Yes, I can always work to get better on my communication, but what can you do to maybe hear someone that have an accent or look different, or bring new ideas or concepts around the table? So I think that how, in the way that I manage that is just going back to what brings meaning. My mentors many times are in the community. Going back to spend time in the community is where I find, meaning to get back in the wagon and face the challenges.
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Khan, you started out with, you decided to go into the community. Was it difficult for the community to accept you? Did you have challenges in that regard to get people to take you seriously when you started?
So I faced a lot of challenges. So there are lots of challenges. One, we currently support 1,600 children in 24 schools in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. And the children that we support are predominantly children of color. And there's a lack of trust in a lot of the families when we come in and as an organization and we want to offer support. And we work very hard to build trust in the communities and in the schools that we come into. And that's really challenging for us as an organization, and trying to figure out what is the best way to reach the children that we know need our help, and who do we partner with, and how do we align ourselves with different organizations and different partners within the community so that we can support as many children as we can. In our community, there's about 114,000 kids who could use our support. So the need is tremendous, and we're one organization that is literally at this moment just scratching the surface of the need. So we need to partner and be thoughtful with different organizations and different people, and to be creative with whom we align ourselves with or partner with, like I said. So we do face a lot of challenges. Part of when we work with families, we ask for parental consent forms, and that's a big stumbling block for us because of language barriers, the lack of trust. Like I mentioned, many of our families are hesitant to sign the parental consent forms because they're afraid that we may share that with a third party, to which we have on our forms that we don't share it with a third party. However, there is hesitation on many of our families to sign those forms. So we're trying to figure out, by having discussions with the guidance counselors and with the principals, and even bringing families to the table to find out what is the best way to have the families feel comfortable to fill out the forms to work with us.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of the work that you all do requires a lot of trust. Dr. Durant Jones, I understand, I know equity, dealing with diversity, equity, inclusion is not easy, but again, it requires a lot of trust, right, from the organization. So you have any examples of obstacles that you have had to deal with or overcome in your work?
When I think about some of the obstacles, I didn't realize it was an obstacle until maybe 10 years into my career here in higher ed. One of the biggest obstacles was this idea that my colleagues didn't see color. And so that was supposed to be a good thing, that this idea of colorblind society, and that I am not viewed as a Black woman was really positive. And, I probably didn't confront that as early as I should have, because I enter the classroom every day. I enter this institution every day. When I was working as a speech pathologist, I entered the patient's room every day as a woman of color. And I take great pride in that. And that is my identity. And needing to help educate colleagues and peers that, this idea of a colorblind society is not a positive thing. It's actually something they need to work through, and to understand that my lived experience, whatever setting, is often correlated with my identity. So in higher ed, the effect of, faculty student evaluations, to think that color couldn't factor into my ratings or in how I interact with students in the classroom, or how students interact with me, might not be impacted by my race or my identity, is, not acknowledging my lived experience. So I really learned to speak up and educate people about this concept of a colorblind society. And I'm not talking about the 1990s or 70s, I'm talking about the 2000s, it's still an issue.
Wow. Yeah, I get that. It's still an issue. So interesting, you all, in the things that you have done, how has unconscious bias been a factor, and how have you dealt with that and had to educate people about unconscious bias in the work that you do? Dr. Cupertino, I'll start with you.
Well, I think, good question. I have had many experiences over the years, and I think, sorry that I keep coming back to language here, and I can explain why, but, I have had many circumstances that brought back, the language barrier that, dealing with immigrants or second language, English as second language. And, how do you deal with the unconscious bias? For me, over the years, I have learned to feel comfortable, to be uncomfortable in that space where you just open the can of worm. And, we got to talk, and this got to stop. And many times what you get is like, oh, I had no idea that you felt or or you experience that. And then is when we start talking, like, you see, we're walking in the line of unconscious bias. You had no idea of something that, language barrier or any other stereotypes. So it's an uncomfortable conversation, but over the years, I have learned to be comfortable after many experiences and after feeling broken for a while. Now, I think this is how I approach these tough conversations on unconscious bias with leadership that talk very differently than I do.
So I would say in my professional experience, I've used every opportunity to discuss unconscious bias. So even during my studies as a DNP student, when I did my DNP work focused on maternal child health disparities, that was the theoretical, or that was the background of my work. And so taking advantage of presentations to talk about it, I carry that work into what I do now as a professor, with weaving, social determinants of health in the educational curriculum. And so, yes, people are going to feel uncomfortable, but it's a conversation that needs to be held. And also getting people to understand that unconscious bias leads to death, leads to premature death, leads to harming people that we serve. And so if you don't understand that, then you need training, and training will help you reveal your unconscious bias. We all do have biases, no matter if you think you don't, we all do have some biases, and that's why they have tests for that. But really the point is that using the leadership role to say, okay, where can I integrate this into the work that I'm doing? And I've done that through speaking and through the educational curriculum for the future nurses or nurse practitioners.
I think part of Baltimore Hunger Project's responsibility is educating the volunteers who come in through our doors every day when we have packing sessions, to let them know that weekend childhood hunger or childhood hunger isn't just happening someplace else, that it's happening in our backyard, and that it isn't just an epidemic in Baltimore City, that it's happening in Baltimore County, and that it's children in our own children's schools, and it's in our neighborhood. And I think there's a misconception in my community, and my guess is it's in everybody else's community. And if I were to ask the people who join us for packing sessions if they can define food insecurity, 9 out of 10 of them cannot define it, and they don't understand what it means, and they can't give me examples of it. And I feel that it's my organization's responsibility and my own responsibility to help them understand what that means. And so that when they walk out the door, they can go home and sit at the table and share with their family members what they just learned and what they experienced. And the impact of putting together our weekend food bags, when they put it together, we have a packing session this evening, the food bags are going out tomorrow for our children, for them to take home on the weekend. So the impact is immediate. And I want them to be able to share that experience when they go home, and then in the next day with their colleagues or their friends at school. And I feel like that's a really big part of what we do, is to be able to impart that information to them.
Thank you.
Maybe I could just jump in. I agree with everything people have said. I think one of the things that's been very important is to name it and to call it out, or I should say call it in when it happens. And what's been really effective is through the education that my colleagues have talked about, seeing a difference in having colleagues that are now allies, co-conspirator allies, really recognizing when it looks like unconscious bias or it looks like a microaggression, not waiting for me to have to identify it or for me to experience that trauma, but actually they calling it out or calling it in, which has been really, really important.
Yeah. So you all have talked about things that have about these qualities and how you dealt with various things, but very specifically, what qualities or assets or people, because we talked about mentors and sponsors as well, helped you get to where you are today? Dr. Barnes?
So where do I start? I would say I've had I've had mentors in different aspects of my career. And I can't single out one mentor that I've had, because I've had a mentor for academic reasons, for personal matters like finances, figuring life out. I've also, because I've always been involved with professional organizations like Chi Eta Phi Sorority Incorporated, I've had mentors through there. When I graduated from the DNP program, I was looking where to publish my first manuscript. And Joseph's, which is the publication for Chi Eta Phi, became my first publication. And my mentor is a sorority sister of mine, and she's a phenomenal woman and an educator, and also in the Hall of Fame. And so she has all these accolades, and she has really helped me in that aspect as far as writing. So I feel like I've had mentors for different aspects of my career and also my personal life, as well as mentors to guide me in my leadership style. I feel like through the different areas that I've had leadership opportunities, I've learned a lot about myself, and also how to deal with people, right? How to be emotionally intelligent. That's a new term I learned when I was in the graduate program, because I'm a very passionate person. And so sometimes that can come off in a very different way to people, right? And how do you become emotionally intelligent? And how do you also deal with me observing things and observing all types of things in the workplace, but not necessarily needing to address all of them at one time, right? So how do you manage, holding your place in leadership, but also having good relationships with people who look up to you as well?
Okay. Lisa, would you like to answer that question, Dr. Jones?
Thank you. I was thinking about qualities, and I think these are qualities that serve people well, but just being having cultural humility, but really truly understanding what it is to take on diverse perspectives, not assuming that one's identity or life experience can dictate another experience. Another quality is when individuals are able to look at another human being with love and compassion, and also holistically recognizing that we are more than just our career or our profession. There's a context that brings us into a particular space and time. And I agree the idea of mentors, but I go back to that idea of sponsors. Sponsors often it was colleagues that were not of color, that were entering spaces that I wasn't naturally having access to, but they made sure that my name was raised or identified within those spaces. And that made a tremendous difference. And again, I think that's true in higher ed, but probably other institutions as well.
Okay. All right. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Khan.
So I think I've always tried to be courageously authentic. And I can't say that I have knowingly had mentors or sponsors along the way. I think I have chosen to surround myself with people whose strengths are my weaknesses. And knowing that I'm constantly on a journey and a path to always be learning from other people, and to know that I don't have all of the answers. And I'm always seeking to understand what is it that I don't know, and never to assume that I do know, because I haven't walked in the shoes of the people that I'm trying to help. And instead of making those assumptions, I want to just keep asking. And so that has served me well. And I would also say, as a mom, I'm always looking at things through the eyes of a mom. Like how I want to treat the children through Baltimore Hunger Project the same way I treat my own children. And that has also served me well.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Cupertino, would you like to answer that question or? Okay, so, the work you all do is incredibly important. And I always think about when you have really dynamic people out there doing things and making a big difference, how do you make sure it's sustainable? How do you make sure that it is going to, keep going and to live beyond, any of us, right? So what do you do? I know you've had mentors and sponsors. Are you mentoring and sponsoring that next generation? Are you, what is it that you're doing to make sure that this work is sustainable? Dr. Cupertino, would you like to answer that question?
So, within what I do, the community outreach and engagement, I have been, in this work for more than 30 years. And it's great when I look back in coalitions or efforts that I start out 20 years ago are still there and growing. So I think sustainability, but I would go back to, the principles of collaborations and partnerships, transparency, trust, and creating that safe space for collaborations and partnerships. I think that that what brings sustainability. And for me, how am I still here after 30 years, doing the same work and expanding has been, just that constant reward of working in what I truly believe happening over and over and over. That's the opportunity to partner with communities, to bring their voices to Wilmot or to academia, what is not only easy to do, to bring the researchers out there and motivate it. So I think that this is the sustainability, to be able to transform in leadership roles that becomes even more tangible.
Thank you. Dr. Barnes.
So sustainability is different areas. So one is funding, right? And that looks different in different organizations. But in my experience in my organizations with being a part of nonprofits, we have to do a lot of fundraising and also applying for grants as well. Community relations is important. Having a tight relationship with our local politicians that support us, that come to our events, that promote us, that partner with us, that helps with sustainability as well. And then I would think on the leadership role as well is also succession planning. Succession planning is so integral in keeping the organization alive. And, when you go into a leadership position, it's not, I'm here forever, right? It's, I'm doing my job. I may be starting a new program. I may be starting a new service, but, I'm surrounding myself with an executive board, but we're not going to be here forever. So we have to mentor the next leaders, emerging leaders to come up and take your role and take that program to newer heights, because sometimes what happens in organizations, you keep the same leadership and you don't really get new ideas. So being progressive, and I think I've always naturally gravitated toward organizations that are more progressive and not set in their ways. So I welcoming diversity, welcoming new leadership, and succession planning as well has helped sustain programs and services.
Great, thank you. Ms. Khan.
So Baltimore Hunger Project has an Empowering Youth Leadership Initiative where we are bringing on cohorts of young or teenagers, 10th and 11th graders, where we are challenging them to help solve weekend childhood hunger. And it's a year-long program. And we're weaving advocacy and leadership and all sorts of really wonderful programs through bringing in guest speakers and experiential programming. And my thought is that we empower them and challenge them to come up with ways to solve different problems by teaching them what are the root causes of poverty, explaining to them different things like redlining and what are systems that are in place that are causing families to be unable to change the way that their lives are, food deserts, explaining, like I said, food insecurity, things like that. And I think that they can then go back into their communities and share it with their peers. And then we create dozens of children who then are empowered to make change, whether it's hunger or it's homelessness or whatever it is that inspire them. Then they become the next change agents. And that's what I'm hoping. We create a new generation of kids who become adults like us who want to make changes and make this world a better place.
Yeah. Fantastic. Dr. Durant Jones?
I, echo many of the comments, and definitely building coalitions, I think, is critical. Building coalitions of peers that are equity-minded, that will work fearlessly and tirelessly to ensure that policies and procedures are changed so that any changes and improvements that we make in the area of DEI, that space doesn't suddenly get forgotten when a specific individual or a specific leader leaves. The other thing is really, I'm going to again speak in a higher ed space, but ensuring that our students receive leadership training during their education so they don't have to discover that they can be a leader 20 years, 15 years into their profession, that they actually leave an institution with a critical curiosity of what would it be like to be a change maker and to actually inform and transform the communities that they're going to return to after their college education.
So, I probably should have asked this earlier, but this work that you all do is important, and it's often very, very challenging and difficult. So what drives you? What is it? Why do you do what you do? What keeps you going? Anybody? Go ahead, Dr. Durant Jones.
I guess I smile because sometimes there's days I don't know that it's going to keep going. It's very fatiguing. I think all of us can say it's DEI work, equity work is extremely. Every one of us here, I think, have had days, I'm sure, where you're wondering if this is really going to move the needle, especially when we see these narratives, these stories repeated over decades. So, the conversation about increasing diversity in higher ed administration or in faculty, increasing the diversity of our student population, better retention and graduation rates for our students of color. These things seem to be, we can find articles and initiatives over decades that have tried to do it, but believing there can be change and knowing there can be improvements made, I think is what really drives the hope that we stick with it. I also have seen the detrimental effects of some of my colleagues who have been fatigued, and I acknowledge why fatigue factors in. I know I've been there, but at the same time, if we allow fatigue to enter into a movement of becoming a more equity-minded environment, then where will that charge spark? Where will that happen? So I think that's what really keeps me moving.
Okay, great. Dr. Cupertino.
Well, I echo my friend here. It is exhausting, and there are times that it becomes, and I don't know if it is true for others, but about 3 years ago, I got to a burnout, in a very, yeah, it was not pretty. And how did I keep going? How did I get back in the wagon? My family, my parents, who are my mentors, right? And then I went back to my roots where, everything started, everything that I am, lots of the things were established in childhood on this journey on social justice so I went back there, but definitely my mentees, they're the opportunity, even when I thought 3 years ago that I was going to be done and going to do something else. My mentees and just to see how they're better off, not because the system it's better off, but they're much better and stronger than I could ever be at their age. So, seeing these mentees getting to medical school, seeing DACA students being accepted, being, working with them, renewing the DACAs. And so those are the things that kept me going when I just broke. Of burnout, of living in the system, that it gets hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. It gets hard. Dr. Barnes?
So I definitely experienced burnout. Last year, I felt like was the pinnacle of burnout, dealing with the pandemic and not having outlets, right? Not traveling, not doing some of the things that I love to do, and trying to stay safe and stay away from COVID. And so, what I had to do was, recharge myself, prioritize self-care, take a step back, set boundaries with my work. And I felt like that was really helpful in rejuvenating my soul. But I never got to compassion fatigue. I never got to that extreme. I think I did a good job at recognizing the stress early on and not getting to the point where, some people were ready to walk away from the profession because of how up and down and demanding that the nursing profession had become especially during the surges of COVID. And I would say what keeps me going is some of the things that I impart with my organizations when I can sense that my fellow nurses get tired. It's just that, if you just make a ripple effect, that is good enough, and we are in the position we're in because of our ancestors who have sacrificed their time and their lives to stand up for what's right, stand up for human rights, stand up for equality and equity. And so they may not have seen, I refer to Martin Luther King's speech, and may not seen all the changes in their lifetime, but they planted that seed. And then the next generation carries it, and the next generation carries it. And that's what we are inheriting is what our ancestors have done. So I think sometimes the work seems too grand, and I just say, just take a bite out of it. Take a bite out of the sandwich, and and just try to make a small impact. And you've done good enough, and that's it. We can't solve all of the world's problems. There's a lot. I have a lot of ideas. I've always been that type of person. I have too much going on in my brain, but I take a step back and say one thing at a time. And that's it. And I've done a good job. Job well done.
Fantastic. So yeah, one step at a time. One foot in front of the other. So I get that. So for the rest of you, I think that's an interesting perspective. How do you keep everybody else motivated around you? Ms. Khan?
So for us, the work that we do is a little bit different than what the other women who I have to say, I'm like really honored to be on the same panel as the three of you. So thank you for sharing the panel with me. What we do is, we're feeding children, and in my mind, there's no greater work than feeding children. And so it's hard to not be motivated to feed children. And so I don't have to work very hard to motivate people to do the work that we do. And especially during COVID, when the schools were closed and we didn't have our regular access to children, I had an overabundance of volunteers who wanted to join us, and we became community food distributors. And for the last 2 years, we were on-site community food distributors, where every Friday we distributed fresh produce and fresh eggs and bread, and our weekend food packages and necessities like laundry detergent and deodorant and hand soap and whatever I could source in the community to over 2,000 families. And as much as we were supporting the community, I'll be honest and tell you that they were supporting me and holding me up. And it was probably one of the greatest experiences I have ever had. And so I don't think myself or any of my volunteers, we wouldn't change a thing during COVID. I know when people say that they had time to clean their closets and read books and watch things on Netflix. Like many, the three of you, all of us, we didn't have any time to do any of that. But I wouldn't go back and change any of it, because it has been such an amazing, rewarding time to see how the community came together and supported each other, and how we all stood together and helped each other. And it was as tiring and as exhausting as it was, it has just renewed my faith in humanity, and how everybody just, I don't know, it's just been an amazing, I have had an amazing experience. So it has not been hard to motivate people to feed kids.
I think I have a very similar experience. You know, my work, it's about bringing community voices to Wilmot Cancer Center, and, you know, using, being out there. So my first day at Wilmot was the day that the university closed. And my job was to do community engagement and outreach in disparities. And so year and a half later, we had 76 people getting together last October to advise and orient and act with Wilmot on change. So I have not had any problem despite of COVID. And especially because this is what is my job, to zoom in, where is the problem, come back to Wilmot with the community and say, here's where you need to put your resources. Here's where you need to do your research. Here, if you truly want to have a difference, drop everything that we have been doing until now and let's do this in a different way. And I bring the community with me. So it's not me saying, you know, so I have not had any problem. I have a team, you know, I have people in my team that has been with me for 15 years with the same flag. They have moved with me to Washington and now they're here, you know, and because this is what we're about. So I have no problem motivated, and absolutely that keeps me going like a fire.
Wow. So that is awesome. And I know you all, it's wonderful the way you talk about your work, but that's hard work. I'm sorry, it's still hard. It's hard. If you said what I read about you when it said poverty is complex, feeding children is not. Actually, it is. I mean, it is. That is challenging work, and so it's wonderful that you're out there doing that. But and the fact that you love it, all of you with the work that you do, it comes through. But the work is hard. And so, how do you find the people who are so dedicated and so interested in keeping this work going and working with you? And do they find you? Do you find them? How does that work?
Go ahead.
So I'll go back to when I said about being courageously authentic. I think they find me. And I think that, so I'm not very comfortable talking about myself, so I'll just say that. But I believe in my heart that I have created something that people want to be a part of. And Baltimore Hunger Project so it's a very special place, and it is some place that people want to be a part of. And the work that we do is very powerful. And I think that, yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I have to kind of think about that. I love the courageously authentic. I think that's critical to build trust and a coalition that would be willing to take sometimes very difficult journeys with you. Being willing to be bold, helping people see the why. I often think of Simon Sinek's, you know, always start with the why, helping people see the why so that you're not convincing them this is an important journey or movement, but they buy into it. So I think that's what brings some of us together.
So I just wanted to piggyback off of what Ms. Khan was saying about her community work and being authentic. I think also the aura you give off, the energy you give off, you know, I refer back to the power of positivity, right? It naturally, people gravitate towards you. and also the way you represent yourself and the things that you stand for. In regards to food insecurity, I was talking about putting together a community health fair about a month ago, maybe a little bit less, with my vice president in Theta Chi. And I stated, I would love to have someone come in and do a cooking demonstration, for the community, something interactive, not the traditional, just speaker event and people get tuned out sometimes with all day talking, and something interactive, and then introduce them to healthy foods. A couple of days later, an owner of a restaurant / lounge called me and said, he does community work as well, and there's a food as medicine initiative that he wants me to be a part of. So he set up a meeting, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I literally said out loud to the universe that I want someone to come and do a cooking demonstration for the community and introduce them to healthy foods, and also 15-minute meals of, you don't always have to eat out. You can do something quick and meal prep, right? So I spoke it into the universe, and then the energy just came to me. So now with my LLC, the next step is partnering with a community-based organization for Food as Medicine initiative. We're working on that now. And I love how Ms. Khan spoke about food insecurity, because people think of food insecurity just being a poverty issue. It's actually middle-class folks that are dealing with food insecurity. Because if you go to your doctor and get a life-changing diagnosis, and now you're incurring medical bills, you can develop poverty, being middle-class, having a full-time working job with inflation going on. And now you have all these medical expenses. Now you're pinching pennies for your meal every day. And especially if you have kids to take care of. So some of the recipients of this Food as Medicine initiative are actually college educated, citizens in the community, residents in the community, who are paying $4,000 a month in rent in New York City, right? So the picture of food insecurity is actually more pervasive than what we think it is. But just naturally, just how you put yourself out there, things that you speak on, it brings that those people towards you.
That is a very good reminder. The face of food insecurity is very different from what people probably think that it is. So thank you for that. So why do you think it's important for women and for women of color to wield their professional talents to address equity and access and create opportunities for others to follow in their footsteps? Dr. Durant Jones.
I think so often women of color are underestimated. I remember when I entered the academy, someone recommended a book, Presumed Incompetent. And I never really understood, too much of what that was. And it was a series of narratives and empirical research that really talked about how sometimes women are perceived in the academy and why it was so difficult to attain administrative positions or research opportunities or research grants. So I think it's important for women of color to demonstrate capacity, to demonstrate and dispel the myths of incompetence. We're not incompetent. We're highly educated, well-trained, thoughtful leaders. And I think it's important that we put ourselves in positions where that can be viewed, not to be tokens or not to be performative, but to prove that we are very competent individuals in our respective fields.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else thought there? Dr. Cupertino?
Yeah, I think, you're making me think here carefully. Why should women of color be around the table, addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Many times it's like, oh, because you're Latina, you can do this work. And we know that's not true, right? But why? And for me, why is that we have been in this area of in the community or doing diversity, equity, inclusion much longer You know, there is a lot of people join the wagon right now, but we have been in this, you know, we have published or we have written, we have thought carefully and critically on how to address, you know, how, you know, to address social justice or diversity, equity, inclusion. So this is, I think, one of the reasons. And we have all these experiences, you know, now we keep changing the name on how, you know, how to call racism or discrimination and adding new language. We have been experienced this way before we have these new names or, you know, so I think this is what we add. And we absolutely add, we add innovation. We add a sense of urgency to get the job done because we are there close in the community. We know the community can't wait 5 years for a research project, get results, or the next report. There are things that needs to be done today. And I think we share and we bring that around the table. Wait, we need to change this now. And that means we need different outcomes now. And the change needs to happen now, you know, not in the next strategic planning or, you know, so I think this is why women like this panel. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much. And you're making me think a lot. You know, here, I need therapy after, so I can ground myself again. But this is great. And I truly believe that we have a lot to add around the table.
Okay, so we all agree that women, and especially women of color, need to be in this space. And Dr. Barnes, did you want to add something on this topic?
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, we know that there are so many systemic barriers for the advancement of women still to this day. They're invisible, but they're palpable. And, you know, we know that representation matters. We know that if the cliche statement of, you know, if you don't have a seat on at the table, then you're on the menu. We have to be in the position of changing policies and making decisions, because our voice matters. And you know, there's just certain issues in you know, like in healthcare, that I feel like women should be making decisions, not white males. I'm sorry, like, you know, and so, but there's so many barriers for us to climb the leadership ladder. And you know, we see what's happening right now with the Judge Brown, the nominee for Supreme Court Justice, and we know that confirmation hearings do not always exist. They started to exist to exclude certain people out. And the initial time was really anti-Semitism, right? So we know that there are those barriers, again, barriers to, oh, now we have to have these confirmation hearings. Now we have to check you know, you have to prove yourself. And we know that, like with Judge Brown, she runs rings. She's overqualified for the position, but she still has to be twice as good and composed after being attacked, right? So so there's a lot of things that women have to struggle to get in advance, but breaking that pathway, breaking down that wall makes it so much easier for other women to come along, because now it's not the first anymore. That's already been crossed off.
You're right. So thank you. So we all agree that women, and particularly women of color, need to be in this type of work. So can you share some strategies that can aid women to achieve a more prominent role in their organizations or in their fields? You know, what is it? How do they step up? What is it they need to do? And I'll take a volunteer or I'll call on. Let's see. Thank you, Mr. Rod Jones.
I think it's kind of pulling together what many of my colleagues have said. We have to be bold. We have to step out of our comfort zone. Sometimes we're working so hard to excel at our discipline. We're not necessarily thinking about what the next step may need to be in order to advance an agenda or an initiative. So I think being bold, being willing to step out of a comfort zone, and also being willing to take advantage of opportunities that are not naturally coming our way. We have to fight for those. We have to make sure it's clear that we're willing to gain those experiences, those opportunities that may not seem to be a natural next step. That's my first thought.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have a thought before I move on that one? Yes, Dr. Barnes.
No, I would just say the same thing, and also not minimizing ourselves. I think women have a tendency to say, I'm just this and I'm just that, and minimizing our work and not wanting to be a big, the bigger person in the room. And so that minimizing ourselves can be a barrier for our own advancement as well. I think also, continuing to learn, continuing to grow, take on opportunities. We have more challenges because of just naturally child rearing and all the other expectations in our family of taking care of sick loved ones. And a lot of those obligations fall on us. So we have more challenges in regards to going back to school, pursuing our education. Some women have actually sacrificed their education or advancing their career because they want to be, because they have to take care of their family. So, there's a lot of things that we experience, but I think in general, it's just, elevating ourselves and not minimizing what we do, because we're amazing.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, I just, it just made me think about something that, I have been trying to develop for many years, is this ability, I think I already said this in your early questions, to be able to recognize what is mine, and what is the other, because I think women, and you add color and age and in immigrant and in gender, you just pile up. And, how can I say, sometimes you just go home thinking, yeah, maybe I'm overreacting, I'm overreading, I am over, and then you come home with that feeling. But when you start looking, yes, maybe I overreact, or maybe I didn't communicate as effectively, or maybe I really upset the fact that there is a male white that said the same thing that I said, and suddenly everybody heard that it didn't hear
Right.
what I said, instead of just taking, yes, I take ownership of my role, but the system and others need to take ownership so we can start meeting in halfway, and being better places. So I think this is, something that I'm practicing. Not good at it, but I'm trying.
Right. Thank you. As I listen to you all, I read your bios, you all are formidable, right? And so what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? Okay, Ms. Khan, you're laughing, so you get to answer the question.
Oh, I'm laughing because I'm up all night. So I work two jobs. So I do tax returns, and I also run Baltimore Hunger Project. And when I started Baltimore Hunger Project, my daughter was in high school. She's now a junior in college. And she told me that she wishes I started this when she was in college because I'm never home. And I, am never available. And she is actually, she's studying abroad this semester in Europe. And she calls me and she tells me all the time, I'm never free and I can never talk to her and I'm always working. And so I worry that I'm not a good enough mother. And my son lives in New York and he works in a law firm and I'm never available to talk to him. And I don't have enough time to do laundry. And sometimes I worry I'm not a good enough wife and I'm not good enough to my parents and my siblings. And I worry about all those things. And did I get my taxes done? And I don't know, did I change the oil in my car? I worry about 1,000 things and the 100 volunteers that I am managing all week. And did the food get delivered? And I feel like I'm, not doing enough, and 1,000 things I worry about. Am I good enough? I have guilt. I have all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you know what? I started something amazing and I need to believe it and I need to own it. And it takes grit and it takes perseverance. And many people have ideas and I don't know what percentage, but not everyone takes an idea and turns it into something. And I need to believe that. And I probably need to tattoo it across my arms and, keep reminding myself that this is something that I'm proud of it. I just need to remind myself, but a lot of this stuff keeps me up at night. A lot of people depend on me and a lot of people count on it. And I want to be sure that the kids that we support, they know that this food is coming home every Friday. That keeps me up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the guilt is real. I get that. It's real for lots of women. But people depend on this. You're right.
Yeah.
Anybody else got a thought along that line? What keeps you up at night? Anything? Formidable women that you are. Yes, Dr. Cupertino.
It's the same. I grew up in my core is family first, family second, family third. And I just feel terrible a lot and often for not being able to be, because the hours of work and, in my mind just gets, into work. And I feel I have this constant feeling that I'm not being true to my true core self, family. So yeah, my husband is a COVID survivor and I did not stop working, so it's just like, should I have, so constantly the guilt that my friend just share, that's tough. That's very hard.
That is challenging. Absolutely. So then given, how you all work and how hard you work and everything else going on in your lives, when you think back, who is a female leader that you would like to emulate, or you just, and why? Anybody? Yes, Dr. Durant Jones.
I hope it doesn't sound campy or whatever, but when I think about, when I read Michelle Obama's book, it was just, and I'm not saying I could ever emulate the woman in any way, but when she talked a lot about feeling the imposter syndrome, I could relate to that so much. When I look at her, poised, elegant, intelligent, together, I mean, she is just the whole package. And when she was writing, she talked a lot about herself not feeling good enough, like some of my colleagues have said, or the imposter syndrome. I could just relate that she was willing to be vulnerable and expose that really spoke to me. And if someone that has her level of accomplishment would be able to relate and share that story, really was meaningful, because imposter syndrome is very real. And I think sometimes that's what wakes me up at night, really, should I be dealing with this problem? Should I be recommending or leading this project, or, submitting this grant, or whatever it is that I might be doing at time, wake up at 3 a.m. and that's it for the rest of the night. So I would say Michelle Obama.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Barnes, you have someone in mind?
Dr. Durant took my answer. I was going to say.
That's okay. You could say, you tell me why.
I love everything about Michelle Obama. I mean, just number one, just class and poise. I mean, she experienced ridicule for no reason, questioning her husband's credentials. There's a lot of things that can make people angry and lose their mind. And for them to just keep their poise and just class, that takes a lot of work. That in itself takes a lot of work, and so, seeing somebody like her and how she carries herself, that helps me. And when I'm dealing with difficult people or difficult situations, and remembering people like her, like, what would Michelle do? Obama do, because it is hard. And some people try to bring you out of character, and that's not who you are, but you can become someone else if people push you to that limit or stress you out in your work environment. And we're human at the end of the day. We have feelings, we have anger, we have days we want to cry, days that we're anxious, like we talk about anxiety. I'm naturally a worrier. That's always been my temperament. Those are things that I have been working through lately, and working on myself, because there are so many things I worry about. I worry about things I should not have to worry about, like even doing a presentation or something somewhere, and I've done it a million times before. I'm like, what if someone asks me this question, or what if somebody asks me that, or I don't know. So I, at the end of the day, I feel like we all have our flaws, right? We're human. And so I really look to Michelle Obama. I also love, you know, the project, her campaign that she did while she was in office, and really addressing nutrition. I think nutrition is just so important. I wouldn't say I have the best diet in the world, but I know that that nutrition, the food we eat, is causing health issues. But it can also be healing, depending on how you interact, your relationship with food. But we also know, like we touched back on health disparities and social determinants of health, we know that we're not getting healthy foods in our communities because our communities are not, you know, not well funded, not well developed, not well resourced. But we know that there are opportunities for people like in leadership like us to make sure that our community has access to the things that we need. So yeah, I just love everything about Michelle and her daughters, and they're just a beautiful family.
Yeah, I agree with that. Dr. Cupertino, do you have someone in mind?
Yeah, I got to go back to my roots. You know, I grew up 11 years old. I was in a classroom trying to address illiteracy in very poor areas in Brazil with my grandmother, walking hours to teach the ABC to adults, to older adults, you know. Yeah, I think everything that I do and am today comes from those experiences at a very young age. Yeah, my roots, my, you know, great grandmother, my grandmother, with very little resources. We did a lot. So this is why I say here all the time, with or without money, we're there and we're going to have impact, because money doesn't do it all.
Great reminder. Ms. Khan, do you have someone in mind?
I would say my person is my dad. Has always been the first person who's believed in me. He's always taught me just really important lessons that I have held on to. And one of the most important ones that he has taught me is that there are people who command respect and there are people who demand respect. And that you should always be the one who commands it. And he's just somebody that I've always looked up to, and somebody who I think I've always sought his approval, I think. And he's just a giant among men. And just I guess he's my person, and he's somebody that I try to emulate. And I've been blessed, I think, to have worked with him for the last 32 years.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. So we're getting close to time. So I have one last question, and that is, can you tell us about the most significant leadership lesson that you've learned in your career? And I'll start with Dr. Durant Jones.
I think as a leader, you have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to your values. And when you stray from those, that results in disconnects with those who you have built coalitions or networks with. It requires a lot of repair, and it affects your ability to be trusted. So I guess I would say being true to yourself and your values is an important leadership lesson I've learned.
Thank you. Dr. Barnes?
I think in my work with community-based organizations and leadership in that aspect, one of the things that I learned is that, and also one of the areas that I feel motivates me as well, is that, you know, when you're in leadership, you can create whatever you want. And I feel like that's so powerful. You know, I think when, if you were to ask someone, what is the definition of power, they think of somebody who's, you know, a multimillionaire or a celebrity or, you know, big time official. And they don't think of someone in the community who, you know, starts a program, who starts a service that improves interconnectivity between community members and in the healthcare system. They don't see that as a powerful move. That's, to me, what power is. Your ability to influence change. And so in my leadership role, when I create, develop new ideas, get people on board, and we make it happen, it just feels so good. Even giving out nursing scholarships. So that's something else that we do in our organization every year, is giving out nursing scholarship. We do fundraising. And even though it's not going to take over their school loans, it helps. Even the emergency fund, somebody losing a family member and in the middle of their coursework, and they're grieving and still trying to hold their head up high and come to class and still working as well. That little bit of money, it may not seem little to you, but it's actually really keeping them moving, and when people look back on their journey through school, or their journey when they first started as a nurse or whatever, they remember all those people that helped them along the way. And so I would say the power that you actually have, and the power that you don't think you have, is some of the things that I learned as a leader.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Let's see, Dr. Cupertino.
Well, I think, in my leadership, I think that the things that I have been able to, build on my leadership has been the opportunity to create the spaces for community voices, with coalitions or communities that, that I start out 10, 20 years ago, and they're still there. So I think that's how my leadership in academia has done a little bit, by this opportunity to create spaces with grant funding, without money, with collaborations, or just a couple of people around the table, that dream together. In the second one, with leadership, I have been able to influence policy with the community members, because when you get the community together with you, multiple sectors from citizens. So I was involved with DACA, and very closely involved in getting the community health worker curriculum as a profession in the state of Kansas. So when you get to use your leadership to influence policy has really meant a lot to me.
Thank you. Ms. Khan.
So I like to lead by example. There is nothing, with Baltimore Hunger Project or anything that I do that I wouldn't do myself. I would never ask anyone to do anything that I would not do myself. And I love to mentor other people. I think the greatest gift I can give someone else is to be able to mentor them. And I hope that I inspire other people to let them know that they can take an idea and they can turn it into something, and that they can create their own Baltimore Hunger Project. They can turn an idea into something like I have done.
Fantastic. Well, I can't thank you all enough. You've been incredible panelists. You've been open and honest in great conversation on this topic, and I truly appreciate everything you've said this evening. I'm sure our audience was able to take away, at least one, but probably several great nuggets of information. I love, all the things that you said, and you talked about things that all of us experience and all of us are feeling, and I appreciate that that you were open and honest with us and sharing your feelings with us. We all need to implement changes, and so you've given us some great ideas, and so I truly appreciate your time this evening. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and I invite you all to join for next month's Real Conversation. The event details will be available on the Advancement event webpage. And they just put them in the link, okay, as well. So Lift Off, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Leadership Summit on Thursday, April the 7th is the next conversation. So I hope you join us for that. Thank you again to the Office of Alumni Relations and Constituent Engagement for putting this important and timely program together in partnership with the Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Diversity Advisory Council. You will all be directed to a brief survey to share your feedback on this program. And please, if you have ideas about future events, we would love for you to submit them. Give us your ideas on that survey. So again, thank you all very much for joining us. Panel, thank you. I have enjoyed this. I have enjoyed meeting you all. And I wish you all well in your efforts. And again, thank you very much for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so to everyone, thank you again, and Miliora.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.